I'm Shelly Netzer-Edgerton, and this is Green Rose Edge. I am making a new show, just a daily blog for this post. I hate saying episode considering I'm not regular in my posting. So, right now I'm watching Babylon 5. One of my favorites. Do you notice how every time a new TV that you've seen an entire series through, and then you go back and watch this first episode again and see it through, things that you didn't notice get so much funnier? Like characters that end up together later on or end up hating each other are in a totally different way at the beginning. It's funny to see the different character development. Now, with Harry Potter, that's not the case because there's very little character development except for Severus Snape. He's got a little bit of a development, but most characters aren't. I've been reading a lot of couplings with Hermione and Snape on fanfics. I watch them, I read them because the Harry Potter's original was not too entertaining to me. I studied magic genre and science fiction and all that, Arthurian legend to many others, since I was a child. So this was quite interesting to me. Well, in the sci-fi, I was watching the early episodes, and it's funny to see how John and Delenn look at each other and interact in their first couple meetings, since they end up getting married towards the end of the series and end of the third season, somewhere in the fourth season, somewhere in there. And it's funny to see Lando and Jakar have such a hatred, such a bad feelings to start off with, when it's such a tragic end that they end up, in the last words, he calls him old friend as they kill each other. His opinion ends up changing, and his way of looking at things, how much they change. And then Jakar, he becomes much more spiritual, where he gets his own set of followers that follow him as they follow these other religious figures in their culture. Delenn changes from the first, before they when they go back into the Earth-Minbari War, they have Delenn was the one who wrote the order, who made the order to start the war. She was the one who ended the war, and she marries the most powerful, most the human who could destroy their flagship. He got the most decisive victory on the human side during the war. but he ends up marrying Delenn, the one who gave the order to start it, who made the decision. She was the deciding vote of the Grey Council. She is, funny enough, descended from a human. When they show that she is a descendant of the of Sinclair. But it's all interesting when they make them both and it's just very interesting and funny. I watched few episodes of watched Inuyasha straight through, and at the end you see how it ends, and you go back and you see who these characters are. I am in the anti-Kikyo camp. You watch early episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer when you see Spike come on, and then later she's sleeping with him. You see how she interacts with Angel when he first shows up, where Drusilla is. You see Cordy, hate Cordy to begin with. Although me personally, I never liked her even. I liked her with Xander, but I didn't like her with anybody else any other way. I didn't like when Xander cheated on her. I thought that was and the whole faith and all. But I watched Babylon 5, Xena, Hercules, Buffy, Inuyasha, Star Trek, Next Gen, which was best. Watched some of the movies. Watched DS9. I watched Dogma. I listened to Alan Jackson. I love Shania Twain, and Bryan Adams is my favorite musician of all times. But I also like Coolio, Gangster's Paradise, a few Eminem songs, and Boyz II Men. I listen to Backstreet Boys. I am all over the board. So it is very hard for me to think of anything to do specific because I have so many views. I want you to give me a little more focus, if you could. I am going to see Fantastic Beasts when it comes out, the new one, and I will write a review for that, because I definitely want to review Fantastic Beasts, The Crimes of Grindelwald. I'm a fan of Johnny Depp, especially Edward Scissorhands and Crybaby. If you're a Marylander, you're a fan of the local boy, John Walters. Although Crybaby's my favorite, I'm not into some of the ones that are a little more out there from Crybaby and Hairspray. Those are my two favorites. I do like Johnny Depp Pirates of the Caribbean from that character. And I liked, speaking of John Walters, there's a few movies with Ricky Lake that he did, which would be Crybaby and Hairspray. And then she was also in Mrs. Winterbourne, which was cute with Brendan Fraser. Brendan Fraser was in quite a few good movies. I even liked School Ties and, of course, can't dislike Encino Man. And I even like Bedazzled and Monkey Bone, which are a bit lewd, but there's a lot of lewd movies out there. Alan Rickman was good in Dogma. I like his portrayal of Snape, the way he actually acted, and that he had a better character development than any character in the story. But the whole story in general was a little lacking. Me being a real witch and having real knowledge of magic does not help, for she did not show anything new. The whole... They act like having a kind of... This one's hard for me because I am not a... this isn't normal for me. But the wand work, I think in the early 90s, maybe mid 90s, before the story was written, they did a lot of dancing with these as like a baton. The way, because they did the ribbon things, but I think they did ones without, acting like it's a baton for a conductor. So I did not see that her doing as anything specific, since they were like, oh, she's do wand work, have a choreographer. I think they did that. And besides, like I said, a conductor, it's the same exact thing. Even if it wasn't for... I thought they did like dancing in gymnastics, as a type of gymnastics with them before the story. But they talk about all this stuff being new when she came out with it. What writer didn't use Latin for their magic? I mean, really? Who didn't use the stories that way? If you've watched The Worst Witch. By the way, one great story. Worst Witch, my favorite one being the original movie in 1985, around there, with Tim Curry in it, where he played the Grand Wizard, and Fritz Balk, I think her name is, played Mildred Hubble. She later played Nancy in the movie The Craft. Very, very good movie as well. She was a great actress, and the whole story was quite interesting. I liked the Netflix series as well. I've watched the first 2 straight through seasons, and I'm looking forward to more. But they are a little different, but some of the early things have is... I'm also into vampires. I like how Twilight did the vampires, because they gave some study. I mean, she didn't do much, but she gave a nod to the traditions, the stories, and everything about vampires. So she wasn't being just taking, I overheard something and then adding it in and not showing any respect and basis from. The story of the Deathly Hallows, the wand, and the cloak and the stone was actually written prior to the year 1990, because I remember in hearing it in 1990 when I was in school. And I looked for it for years going online. I gotta find out who wrote it. I could never remember that. But I even typed in word for word into search engines at like the library, looking for that, just putting some lines about three brothers on a bridge into the computer. I've asked different librarians at my library that I grew up in and stuff, and I described the storyline. It's about three brothers and they meet death on the bridge. And I had said that for years. I was asking people about that story. I couldn't remember the writer and blah blah blah. And I remembered the story. So I was telling people the story and asking for where it was written from the years in the probably middle. I was probably actually going online by the time I was 18. I was born in 85, so early 2000s. That book didn't come out till years later. So if she knew someone who told her the story I had told them, then I wrote it. If not, whoever wrote it was not J.K. Rowling's either, because it's whoever I actually heard it from. If I'm imagining things, I wrote the story of the three brothers. If not, then J.K. Rowling still didn't, because I don't believe I wrote it. I believe I read it in the early 90s. So when I opened the final book, and it said death, three brothers met death on a bridge, I knew from that moment that's the story I remembered from when I was around 5, about the year 1990. So that story was, no matter what, not written by her. I do not believe I myself wrote it. I am not claiming any responsibility for it whatsoever, but I have been looking for it for a long time, because when I was young, I actually liked the story. That's the only good thing she wrote in it, and she didn't write it. J.K. Rowling did not write the story of the three brothers. I had been looking for it. I was like, there was the 5 Chinese brothers. There were all these brothers books that were very popular in the early 90s that told stories similar to that. So I want to know who really wrote that story, because it was written before the year 1990 because I remember in around the year 1990 was the year, it was 90, 91, somewhere in there was the year it was read to me in the media center. How nobody remembers it. This is just a rant, so I'm just saying I want more information. If you want me to rant more, subscribe and like this video. I'm trying to see what I can do, and I want to get more views. I want to know what you want, because like I said, I have such a varied knowledge of so many things. It's hard for me to put things down to one. I mean, I guess I could do top 10 lists. But right now I'm just a single story.